Have you ever noticed just how exhausting it is to live inside your own head sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. It's a full-time job.
Right. Like you go through your day, you make a minor mistake, maybe you send an email with an embarrassing typo, or you accidentally interrupt someone in a critical meeting.
Yeah, we've all been there.
And suddenly, it's like you are on trial. You're standing in this mental inner courtroom.
Yep, the judge is glaring at you.
Exactly. There's a judge banging a gavel and a prosecutor laying out this meticulous timeline of all your past failures. And you were just desperately trying to defend yourself to yourself.
It's exhausting and relentless.
So what we are exploring today with you, our listener, is the possibility that this entire trial, like all the guilt, the judgment, that constant need to prove your own innocence, it might be based on a massive misunderstanding of what it actually means to be human.
Which is a pretty bold claim, right?
Totally. So welcome to our new deep dive. Today we're unpacking a really profound essay by Philip McManus. It acts as a sort of roadmap to the human ego.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how the source material just flips our fundamental understanding of identity. We so often categorize the ego as this villain.
Right, like an arrogant, selfish thing you have to destroy.
Exactly. But McManus frames it entirely differently. He argues that the ego wasn't born out of malice at all. It was actually born out of a tender, really urgent need to belong.
That's an adaptive survival tool.
Yes, exactly. And understanding that specific origin story, like how the brain constructs a self just to survive childhood, that's the mechanical key to dismantling that inner courtroom you were just talking about.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand that construction, we have to look at the very beginning of human life.
We do. We have to go way back.
The essay describes the newborn's reality as an undivided experience. So there is sensation, warmth, the sound of a voice, maybe the sharp pain of hunger.
Right.
But there's no owner of those feelings yet. A baby cries because it's hungry, but it isn't, formulating a philosophical grievance against the universe.
No, not at all. The cry is simply biological energy-seeking balance. There's literally no seam between the one who feels and what is felt.
Because the concept of an individual self just doesn't exist yet.
Exactly. And the cognitive neuroscience underlying this phase is just remarkable. An infant's brain is processing this massive torrential stream of sensory data.
Just taking everything in.
Right. But the actual neural pathways that create self-awareness, they haven't formed yet.
Which is why, a child doesn't recognize itself in a mirror right away?
Yeah, not until roughly 18 months of age. Before that point, visual input just isn't connected to their internal physical sensations.
So if they see their reflection,
their brain interprets it as another being entirely. They exist as this pure field of experiencing. But then, as the text outlines, the brain begins to cross-reference data.
And that's when what McManus calls soft borders arise.
Yes, the soft borders.
And these are built out of language and social mirroring, right? It happens the moment a caregiver says, like, that's your hand, or good girl, or don't touch that.
Right, and those interactions are absolutely necessary for human navigation, obviously. But they trigger a really profound cognitive shift.
They place boundaries around what used to be a completely seamless reality.
Exactly. And alongside the vocabulary comes the mirroring. The child observes the caregiver's face and registers, a smile as safety.
Or a frown as a potential threat.
Yep. So in those specific microinteractions, the child is discovering itself not as a direct experience anymore, but as an image held in someone else's mind.
Wow.
The brain begins to actually fragment the world into an observer and an observed.
I always picture this like a child actor who gets pushed onto a stage without a script.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, they realize very quickly that if they smile a certain way, the audience, which is their parents, right, claps and cheers.
Positive reinforcement.
Right. And if they cry too loudly or get angry, the audience goes cold. So to keep the applause going, this child desperately memorizes lines and edits their spontaneous behavior.
You're constantly adjusting.
Exactly. And to me, the tragedy isn't that they are acting. The tragedy is that over decades, the actor forgets they're wearing a mask. They start to believe the role is who they actually are.
That's a great analogy on a behavioral level. But we have to remember the biological stakes here are much higher than just putting on a play.
Because an infant is entirely dependent.
Right. For them, parental approval isn't just a social preference. The infant brain equates it with literal survival.
Oh, wow. So rejection means like starvation or exposure.
Literally. So the infant brain uses its massive neuroplasticity to suppress its natural spontaneity in exchange for safety. It builds a psychological defense mechanism.
The survival suit.
Yes. The scientific view of the self is essentially a network simulation. It's this complex filing system of sensory inputs, memories, and social feedback.
Constantly running predictive models to avoid rejection.
You got it. And the simulation is organized into a coherent fiction called me.
The fictional me. So the trouble begins when the simulation starts turning on the organism it was built to protect.
That's where things get messy.
Right. If the fictional me is just a survival suit built on a system of praise and blame, it makes sense that it would eventually turn into a permanent inner courtroom.
It has to. It needs to constantly evaluate its own performance to ensure it won't be rejected by the tribe.
Which brings us to how McManus completely redefines the concept of guilt. Because this part blew my mind.
Yeah, it's a huge pivot. We tend to view guilt as a fundamental law of physics. Like, if you commit an error, you simply must feel guilty. It's just how it works.
Right, it's unquestioned.
But the essay argues that guilt is actually a manufactured human concept, and it's built on a deeply flawed premise.
The premise that learning is a crime.
Exactly. Nature does not operate on condemnation. It operates purely on consequence.
The text uses that brilliant illustration. Does the sea apologize for the storm? Or the hawk for hunger?
Right. A tree doesn't feel shame if it grows crooked to reach the sunlight. It simply adjusts its trajectory based on the environmental data.
It just adapts.
Yes. Humans, however, internalize the social feedback of their caregivers. We built an internal judicial system where every error is treated as a moral failing.
And that fundamentally contradicts how learning actually happens. Like, think about a machine learning algorithm, right?
Yeah.
A neural network.
Oh, perfect example.
It reaches competence by failing thousands of times in rapid succession. When it produces a wrong output, it doesn't experience an existential crisis.
It doesn't sit there feeling bad about itself.
No. It uses a mechanism called backpropagation. It looks at the error, it adjusts the mathematical weights in its system, and it tries again.
It just recalibrates.
Right. Wrong isn't a sin to a neural network. It is literally the data required to improve the model.
And we can take that AI comparison even further. To say a system should have known better before it had the data to know better, that defies the basic mechanics of growth.
It's illogical.
Completely. Blame freezes the past. It assumes the learning process should have been bypassed entirely. And this is where the text introduces the concept of radical innocence.
Which is tough to wrap your head around at first.
It is, because in this framework, innocence is not naivety. And it definitely isn't ignoring harm.
Right. So what is it?
Innocence is the restoration of a natural, guilt-free learning environment inside your own psyche. It is the ability to process an error as data rather than an indictment of your character.
See, I struggle with this part, honestly.
How so?
Well, playing devil's advocate here. If I fire the judge in my head, and I treat every mistake as just data, what stops me from becoming completely unaccountable?
That's the classic fear.
Because, doesn't society rely on a healthy dose of guilt to keep us from acting selfishly and hurting people? If we drop the guilt, don't we just become reckless?
I get that, but that assumes guilt is the only mechanism for behavioral correction, which is a really common misconception.
Okay.
Dropping guilt does not destroy accountability. It actually creates the space for true responsibility. We have to look at the mechanics of blame versus responsibility here.
How does the text define the difference?
Well, blame demands a culprit. It speaks in verdicts, it isolates a single event, and it keeps you stuck in the past, constantly defending your character.
Right. It wasn't my fault because of X, Y, and Z.
Exactly. Responsibility is functionally different. It recognizes connection, it moves with the living present, and it listens for patterns to understand why the system failed.
Here's where it gets really interesting to apply this to daily life. Think about the last time you had a sharp argument with a partner or a coworker.
Oh, the tension is palpable.
Yeah. If your brain is operating out of blame, the central question is, who is at fault? And notice what happens to your body in that moment.
Your jaw clenches, cortisol floods your system.
You get complete tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And you immediately start preparing a defense.
You're building a case.
Right. But if you shift to responsibility, the question becomes, what is this showing me? And the physiological reaction is completely different.
The defense mechanism drops.
Because there is no trial to win.
Exactly. The machinery of self-protection just loses its fuel. You transition from being a victim of circumstance to becoming the author of your experience.
Authorship. I love that.
And the essay points out that when we make this shift, the heart discovers it was never being punished in the first place. It was being taught.
It's a massive reframe.
It is. And honestly, viewing life as a classroom rather than a courtroom. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's actually a profound act of cultural disobedience.
Oh, because keeping people in the courtroom is incredibly profitable.
Extremely profitable. An anxious, guilty population is the absolute engine of modern consumption.
That makes so much sense.
Entire economies are built on identifying a flaw, generating guilt around that flaw, and then selling you the redemption.
Advertising basically mechanizes human insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you that your natural state is inadequate, and hey, we have a product to fix it.
Yep. We see this in the self-help industries too. They sell these complex, exhausting routines just to mend the guilt of simply being an overwhelmed human.
And in our educational systems, we grade deviation from the norm. In various institutions, we moralize it.
Exactly. The fictional me is kept perpetually on trial because an insecure simulation is very easy to manage.
So we took this simple, beautiful spark of human curiosity, like the instinct to ask, what happens if I do this?
Yeah,
And we shadowed it with this paralyzing fear of, will I be punished for doing that?
exactly right.
So stepping out of the courtroom and embracing this accountable innocence, it really is a rebellion. You are refusing to participate in an economy fueled by shame.
You are. When you remove the foundation of the trial, you restore the learner to grace. You start being guided by fascination instead of fear.
Which is a beautiful way to live.
And what the essay makes clear is that this internal shift fundamentally alters how your nervous system interacts with the external world, too.
How so?
Well, when the internal defense drops, compassion emerges as a natural biological consequence.
Which is wild, because we usually talk about compassion as this exhausting moral achievement.
Like a chore.
Yeah. It's framed as something you have to actively generate, like forcing yourself to feel sorry for someone who's really difficult to be around.
Right.
But McManus argues compassion isn't an effort. It's just what happens when the barricades are removed. Like a flower doesn't try to smell good.
Exactly. The fragrance is just what happens when nothing constricts the bloom. We can look at this through the lens of the nervous system.
Do it.
Think of your nervous system as a radar dish.
Okay.
When you are locked in the inner courtroom experiencing guilt or fear, your sympathetic nervous system is engaged. You are in fight or flight.
Right. Heart racing, on edge.
In that state, your radar dish is frantically broadcasting a distress signal. It creates massive interference. You literally cannot pick up anyone else's signal because you are entirely consumed by your own defense.
So love literally can't flow through a clenched fist.
Exactly. But when you drop the guilt and you actually feel safe, your nervous system shifts into a parasympathetic state.
The rest and digest state.
Right. The broadcasting stops. The dish just receives, and that reception, that is empathy.
Wow.
It is the biological resonance of another person's state.
You can't see the other person if you're constantly defending your fictional me.
No, you can't.
Your vision narrows into this survival tunnel where everyone is either a threat to your identity or a validation of it. But this receptive state, it has to be turned inward first, right?
It does. The text stresses that we cannot effectively extend this to others while we are still prosecuting ourselves.
Right.
The tenderness has to be offered to the exact part of your brain that still believes it needs to perform to survive.
And once you integrate that, a really remarkable perceptual shift occurs regarding conflict.
Huge shift.
When you encounter someone who is lashing out or angry or just being difficult, you no longer process them as an enemy.
Right, because you see what's actually happening.
You recognize their behavior as misdirected innocence. It is simply fear-wearing armor.
Fear-wearing armor, that's exactly it.
If someone snaps at you and you realize their radar dish is just broadcasting a distress signal because they are terrified of losing their own inner trial, it changes everything.
It really does.
You don't need to attack their armor.
Yeah.
And that completely redefines forgiveness for me.
It takes the ego right out of it.
Yeah. It strips away the dramatic Hollywood flair where you, like, magnanimously pardon a villain.
Right.
Forgiveness mechanically becomes just the absence of misunderstanding. You're just seeing the reality of their nervous system clearly.
It's beautiful. And if the external result of dropping the mask is compassion, it raises a really vital question about our internal state.
What's that?
Well, without the judge operating the controls, without the constant narrative of the fictional me analyzing every single move, who or what is actually steering the ship?
What remains when the defense falls away?
Exactly.
The essay calls what remains presence. But presence is one of those concepts that has been so heavily commodified.
Oh, completely.
It's sold as this state you achieve if you meditate for 2 hours a day by the right cushion and force your brain to be perfectly quiet.
Right. It's marketed as a goal. But McManus argues presence isn't an achievement you build toward. It's the baseline reality that is uncovered when the noise stops.
Because we have this deeply inherited conviction that all progress depends on effort.
Yes.
But effort inherently belongs to the ego. Effort requires a separate actor who is trying to steer toward a future goal.
And presence operates without that premise. To understand it mechanically, we have to distinguish between intellect and true intelligence.
Okay, what's the difference there?
The intellect is the tool of the fictional me. It analyzes, it compares, and it chops the world into isolated variables to seek mastery over events.
It wants to control things.
Exactly. True intelligence, on the other hand, doesn't seek mastery. It perceives and harmonizes. It expresses itself as the events.
It's action without ownership. You see micro glimpses of this all the time. Think about driving a familiar route home, or an athlete perfectly executing a really complex play.
Or a musician just lost in a solo.
Right. The motor cortex and the body know exactly what to do without the prefrontal cortex narrating the action.
The I completely disappears into the motion.
The music is playing through an instrument that has stopped claiming ownership of the song.
That's a great way to put it. In those moments of profound flow, time just loosens its grip.
Because fear requires an imagined future to exist, right?
Yes.
Yes. And guilt requires a remembered past. When the intellect's narrative drops, past and future dissolve into simple immediacy, the system is just responding to the present data.
And this culminates in what the essay describes as the final veil,
The hardest one to drop.
which is the realization that even our most noble identities are still masks.
Yeah.
The desire to be a helper, to be the angel of your friend group, to save others, that eventually drops too.
It has to. Because it's still a subtle form of the ego, saying, I am the savior and you are the broken thing that needs my saving.
Exactly that. At the furthest edge of this psychological unfolding, the division between the helper and the helped collapses.
Wow.
Service becomes indistinguishable from simply being. It is unbounded intelligence gazing through every eye. Innocence isn't a lack of knowledge. It is an awareness so intimate with existence that it no longer needs to defend or define itself.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this? How do we integrate this into, like, a random Tuesday morning?
Right, the practical application.
It starts with recognizing that the loud, anxious voice in your head is not your enemy.
No, it's not.
It is an outdated survival suit you built when you were too small to know you were actually safe. You don't have to live in its courtroom anymore.
You can just step out.
You can test this today by simply observing your physical reactions. When you make a mistake, notice the biological urge to contract and assign blame.
Catch it in the moment.
Right. Catch the thought, this is my fault, and consciously shift the framework to, what data is this giving me?
It changes everything.
And when someone lashes out, instead of bracing for impact, try to see the fear wearing armor. Treat every moment as instruction rather than an indictment.
To synthesize the mechanics of this journey we've been on today, guilt is the cognitive misunderstanding that turns the acquisition of data into a crime.
Right.
Radical innocence restores the learning environment free from the interference of condemnation. Responsibility is authorship without the paralysis of blame.
I love that.
Compassion is the natural biological resonance that occurs when your internal radar stops broadcasting distress. And presence is true intelligence without intention. It is the quiet reality that remains when there is no longer a fictional me left to defend.
Which leaves us with something really critical to consider. We've talked about how this operates on an individual level, but think about the wider implications. If your entire sense of self, every defense, every judgment, every ounce of guilt, was just an adaptive survival suit you put on when you're too small to know better.
Yeah.
If an entire generation suddenly dismantled their inner courtrooms, if millions of people woke up tomorrow and stopped buying products, casting votes, or choosing careers based on an underlying sense of inadequacy and guilt, what would happen if you realized you were finally safe enough to take it off?
What would tomorrow's civilization even look like?
Exactly. Something to mull over.
Okay.
Until next time.